Ever heard that saying about the only certainties in life being death and taxes?
Yeah, I think most people have heard that one.
Well, today we're going to be looking at how those two things kind of collide in the world of estate tax avoidance.
It should be interesting.
Yeah. So we're going to be diving into how the super rich can use legal strategies to significantly reduce what they owe in taxes, sometimes by like billions of dollars.
Right. And to really get this, we need to start with like just a basic understanding of the estate tax itself.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's a tax on the transfer of wealth after someone dies. So in the U.S. right now, a married couple can pass on something like $27 million tax-free.
Okay.
Anything over that amount gets hit with a 40% tax rate.
So like if you have an estate worth, say, $30 million, you'd only pay taxes on that extra $3 million.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Now, for most people, obviously, $27 million is like an unfathomable amount of money.
Right, right.
But for the ultra-wealthy, we're talking about fortunes in the hundreds of millions, even billions of dollars.
Yeah. And that's really where these estate tax avoidance strategies come in.
And we're going to be using the story of Jensen Huang, CEO of Nvidia.
Oh, interesting.
You know, the company behind all those like powerful graphics cards.
Oh, yeah.
That gamers and all sorts of people love.
Right.
To kind of illustrate how these strategies work in the real world.
Okay.
He's like the 10th richest person in the U.S. right now, so his estate planning is a pretty good example.
Yeah, it's a really good example of how these things play out. Now, it's important to remember, we're not here to like judge anyone for their financial choices.
Of course.
What we're trying to do is explore like how the system works and the implications these strategies have.
Right.
After all, if billions of dollars in tax revenue are being bypassed, it's worth understanding how that's happening.
For sure. So let's start with a strategy with a pretty intriguing nickname, the I Dig It Trust.
Ah, yes, the I Dig It Trust, a classic.
Yeah, so what is that?
Well, imagine someone, let's say John Doe, sets up this trust.
Puts, say, $10 million into it for his kids. He's well under the gift tax limit, so no issues there.
So far, so good.
But here's where things get kind of interesting.
Okay.
The trust, using that initial $10 million plus a loan for Mr. Doe, can actually buy a much larger asset.
Okay.
Like, say, $100 million worth of company shares.
Wait, so the trust is borrowing money from the person who like created it?
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah.
And thanks to a 1995 IRS ruling, those shares bought with the borrowed money aren't subject to estate tax when Mr. Doe passes away.
Okay.
So essentially, the value of those shares, even if they like skyrocket, is shielded from estate taxes.
So the kids inherit the shares, potentially worth like $1 billion, essentially tax-free.
Yeah, that's the idea.
That sounds like a pretty big loophole.
It is a significant loophole. And this I Dig It strategy is just one example of how a seemingly small change in the rules can have these like massive implications.
Right.
Especially for the ultra-wealthy. And you know this is important for you because if billions in estate tax revenue are being bypassed, it could mean less funding for like public services, schools, infrastructure, things that impact all of us.
That makes sense. So how did Jensen Huang use this I Dig It trust?
So back in 2012, he moved about $7 million worth of Nvidia shares into this type of trust.
Okay.
And today, those shares are worth over $3 billion.
Wow.
If they had been passed on directly, his heirs would be facing a tax bill of over $1 billion.
Right.
But with the I Dig It structure, that potential billion-dollar tax bill shrinks significantly.
Wow. Yeah, it really highlights how much these strategies can impact, like, not just individual fortunes,
Right.
but also government revenue.
Absolutely. But the I Dig It trust is, just the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, no.
Another strategy that's gaining popularity is the GRAP maneuver. It's a bit more complex, but equally effective at minimizing estate taxes.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's dive into those drats and see how they work.
All right. So the DRAT, or Grantor Retained Annuity Trust, has its roots in a strategy used by Audrey Walton,
Okay.
the ex-wife of Walmart's co-founder.
Wow.
It's basically a trust designed to minimize taxes on appreciating assets like those rapidly growing Nvidia shares we talked about.
Okay, so this drat strategy sounds pretty complex. Could you maybe break it down for me?
Sure.
Actually, you were explaining it to a friend who's never heard of it before.
Okay, so imagine you put $100 into a box. And this box promises to pay you back that $100 plus a small amount of interest over a set period.
Okay.
Let's say 2 years.
I got it. So I get my money back plus a little extra.
Exactly. Now, let's say during those 2 years, something amazing happens.
Okay.
And the value inside that box explodes to, say, $1,000. The DRAT, that box we talked about, would still only have to pay you back the original $100 plus the small interest.
So what happens to the other $900?
That's the beauty of the DRAT. That $900 representing the growth in value passes to your heirs completely tax-free.
Really?
Yeah, it's like giving them a gift that magically avoids any gift tax or estate tax.
That seems almost too good to be true. Didn't the IRS try to, like, I don't know, crack down on this at some point?
They did initially.
Yeah.
But a tax court judge ruled in 2000 that this strategy, if done correctly, was perfectly legal.
Wow.
And that really opened the floodgates for billionaires, including Mr. Huang, to embrace the GLEAT.
But the I dig it's trust is just the tip of the iceberg. Another strategy gaining popularity is the GRAT maneuver. So these GRAT sound like a pretty sweet deal for anyone trying to, avoid estate taxes.
They can be quite effective.
Did Jensen Huang use this strategy too?
He did, and in a big way. Back in 2016, he and his wife set up 4 GRATs,
Okay.
putting in about $100 million worth of Nvidia shares.
Okay.
Today, those shares are worth a staggering $15 billion.
Hold on. So they put in $100 million and it turned into $15 billion in just a few years.
That's right.
And most of that growth is bypassing estate taxes because of these GRATs.
Precisely. It's estimated that this saved the Huangs about $6 billion in potential estate taxes.
It's really kind of amazing how these strategies can amplify wealth and minimize taxes.
It is.
All within the bounds of the law.
Right. It's all perfectly legal, but these trusts are just one part of the picture.
Okay.
There are other tactics that the ultra-wealthy use to reduce their estate tax burden.
Like what?
Well, another area ripe for tax advantages is charitable giving.
Right.
Obviously, philanthropy is a worthy cause.
Right.
But it can also be a savvy financial move,
Okay.
especially when it comes to estate planning.
So we're going from these complex trusts to charitable donations.
Right.
How are those two connected?
It all comes down to how these donations are structured.
All right.
Let's take a look at Jensen Huang again.
Okay.
Starting around 2007, he started donating Nvidia shares to his charitable foundation.
So he's donating shares instead of cash. What's the advantage of doing that?
Well, it's a smart move for a couple of reasons. First, donating appreciated assets like stocks usually comes with a bigger tax deduction than donating cash.
Why?
This reduces his income tax burden in the years he makes the donation.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But how does this help with estate taxes down the road?
That's where the real strategy comes in. See, charitable foundations are required to distribute at least 5% of their assets to charities each year.
Okay.
It's a rule designed to make sure the money is actually being used for its intended purpose.
That makes sense. So the Huang's Foundation is giving away 5% of its assets to different charities every year.
Well, not exactly. They're fulfilling that 5% requirement mostly by donating to what's known as a donor-advised fund.
Oh, I've heard of those.
Think of it like a charitable holding account.
Okay, but I'm not sure I totally understand how they work.
Sure. So basically with a donor-advised fund, the donor, in this case the Huangs, can put money in, get an immediate tax deduction, and then advise on how those funds are distributed to charities over time.
So they have some say in where the money goes, but they don't have to give it all away right away.
Exactly. And here's the key from an estate planning perspective.
Okay.
When the donor passes away, control of that donor-advised fund can actually pass to their heirs without incurring any estate taxes.
Wait, so they're getting a tax break now for a donation that might not even be used for years.
Right.
And then their heirs get to control it.
Yeah.
Doesn't that kind of defeat the purpose of charitable giving?
It's definitely a point of debate. Some people argue that donor-advised funds provide flexibility
Right.
and allow for strategic giving over time, especially with large sums of money.
Okay.
Others criticize them for their lack of transparency and accountability, suggesting that it basically allows the wealthy to just control these vast charitable dollars indefinitely.
Yeah, I can see both sides of that argument. So how does all this relate back to Jensen Huang's estate planning?
Well, the Nvidia shares that the Huangs donated to their donor-advised fund, which they named G-Force, are now worth an estimated $2 billion. Wow. It's estimated they've saved something like $800 million in estate taxes by using this strategy.
So we've got the I dig it trust, greedies, and now charitable giving through these donor-advised funds.
Right.
It seems like every aspect of estate planning has these loopholes for the ultra-wealthy to exploit.
It does highlight the complexities of the system.
Yeah.
And it definitely raises questions about fairness. You know, if these sophisticated strategies are only really accessible to people who can afford teams of lawyers and financial advisors, is that creating an uneven playing field?
That's definitely something to think about. And it's not just about like individual fortunes either, right?
No.
If billions, maybe even trillions of dollars in his taxes are being avoided every year, that's money that could be funding so many other things.
Right. Things like public services, infrastructure. It could even be used to reduce the national debt.
Yeah, exactly.
You've hit the nail on the head.
Okay.
The impact of estate tax avoidance goes way beyond individual families. It really has implications for society as a whole. Right. And that's why it's so important to understand these strategies, even if they seem really complicated at first.
Family limited partnerships. It does sound like something you'd see in like a holiday movie.
Right.
About a, family-run business.
Yeah.
Not something a tech billionaire would use.
It might be surprising.
Yeah. How do those work, and how do they help with estate taxes?
Well, on the surface, they're pretty straightforward.
Okay.
A group of family members pool their assets together. This could be investments, real estate, even a company, into a partnership. And the senior generation, usually the parents keep most of the control as general partners.
Okay.
They're the ones calling the shots.
So it's like a family-run investment club.
Kinda, yeah. But here's where the estate tax magic happens.
Okay.
The senior generation can gradually gift limited partnership units to their children or other heirs.
Okay.
These limited partners get to benefit from the partnership's assets, but they have less control and fewer rights.
So they get a piece of the pie, but they can't really decide what kind of pie it is.
That's a good way to put it. And this limited control is key for tax purposes.
Okay.
Because those limited partnership units have restrictions. Maybe the heirs can't easily sell their shares or have much say in the day-to-day operations.
Right.
Those units are considered less valuable than if they were just freely tradable assets.
So if I'm understanding this right, the partnership units are given a discount because they come with strings attached.
Exactly. Let's say a unit is actually worth $1 million based on the underlying assets.
Okay.
Because of those limitations on the limited partners, it might be valued at, say, $700,000 for gift tax purposes.
So the person giving the gift pays less gift tax up front.
Right.
And potentially their heirs pay less estate tax later on.
That's the idea.
Sounds like a win-win for the wealthy family.
It can be, but the IRS is aware of these strategies.
Right.
And they often scrutinize family-limited partnerships for aggressive discounting. There has to be legitimate business purpose for the partnership, not just a way to dodge taxes.
It sounds kind of risky.
It can be.
But I can see why people would try it, given the potential savings.
Right.
Did Jensen Huang set up one of these family partnerships?
He did back in 2008.
Oh, okay.
The Huang family established a family-limited partnership.
Okay.
And over the years, he's transferred millions of dollars worth of Nvidia shares into it.
Okay.
Those shares now held within the partnership are likely subject to those valuation discounts we talked about,
Right.
further reducing his family's potential estate tax liability.
Wow. So we've got the I Dig It Trust charitable giving through donor-advised funds.
Right.
And now these family-limited partnerships.
Yeah, it's a whole toolbox of strategies
It really is.
that the ultra-wealthy can use to minimize their tax burdens.
Yeah. And it really does make you think about, the fairness of it all.
It does.
And whether everyone's playing by the same rules.
Exactly. Because if these strategies are only accessible to people who can afford, these teams of experts, is that really fair?
It's definitely a question worth asking.
Yeah.
And it's not just about, like you said, individual fortunes either.
No, it's not.
If billions, maybe even trillions of dollars in a state, taxes are being avoided each year.
Right.
That's money that could be used for so many other things.
Absolutely. It could be funding public services, improving our infrastructure, even helping to reduce the national debt.
Exactly. So the impact of all this goes way beyond just, the wealthy families using these strategies.
It really does. It affects society as a whole.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important to understand these strategies, even if they seem complicated.
I agree.
Well, I think we've done a pretty good job of, taking a deep dive into this world of estate tax avoidance today.
We have.
We've uncovered the strategies, explored all the loopholes.
Definitely.
And we learned how people like Jensen Huang are able to minimize what they owe in taxes, often passing on these huge fortunes to their heirs with very few tax consequences.
Exactly. And we've also seen how these strategies, while complex, are becoming more and more common.
Right.
And that's raising concerns about, lost tax revenue and potential inequities in the system.
Yeah, for sure. It's been a really interesting conversation.
I agree.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay.
We talked a lot about the financial side of all this.
Right, the money.
But what about the broader impact on society?
Yeah, that's an important question.
What happens when wealth becomes increasingly concentrated in the hands of just a few?
Mm-hmm.
How does that affect things like social mobility,
Right.
economic opportunity,
Yeah.
even the very fabric of our society?
Those are big questions.
They really are, and I think they're worth thinking about as we go forward.